and welcome to the Hybrid School Builders Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Foley, and I am so glad you are joining me today. I am a fellow grassroots founder who is hoping to make your journey toward founding a sustainable hybrid school a little bit easier. If you are dreaming of starting a hybrid school, or perhaps you've already gotten started, you are in the right place. Join me as we dive into real stories, practical tips, and hard-won lessons that I have learned to help you launch and grow your program with confidence. Remember, building a hybrid school is not just about creating a business or creating jobs. It's not even about just serving the children who attend the program. It's literally about reshaping the landscape of education, and we can do that one community, one entrepreneur, and one program at a time. Okay, so this episode is for you nonprofit founders out there once again. I wanted to talk about something that you should make sure you understand early on, because it's a very, very common, I want to say mistake, but it's not really a mistake. It's more like you just don't know until you know. And that is the division between operations, management, we'll say that's the same thing. I'm going to call it operations, and governance. Okay. Now, I think part of the reason that this can be confusing is because sometimes the words get switched around, or we aren't really sure what the words mean. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you what they mean and tell you how best practice, what works best, is for a very clear distinction between board governance and staff operations, okay? And what often happens, though, in the beginning, and I absolutely understand how this happens, the founder ends up being the one with the vision, and they're doing the work. They've got the heart behind all of this. They're making everything happen. They're the ones who decide to start a nonprofit. Then they learn they need a board. This is assuming it's somebody who isn't like a serial nonprofit starter who is always starting up nonprofits and already knows all of this. A lot of times it's just someone with a vision. Somebody tells them, or they research and say, oh, I guess nonprofit's the best format. Now I need a board. Now I need bylaws. And they're learning all of this as they go, while they're also building the operations. They're building the board. They're learning what governance is. While they're building operations, they're actually building the business. And they're doing them both at the same time. And they're usually driving both things at the same time, organizing both things at the same time. Okay. Much of the time, they want to protect their vision. They want to protect why they created this, okay? And it's very scary to pass that over to a board, because you feel like, well, wait, am I going to have any say in this? Is this board going to be able to change things next year or 6 months from now or 6 years from now? Are they going to make this something that isn't what I originally created it to be? Okay, and so you want to be able to protect the mission of the organization. Now, the irony is that the board is supposed to be protecting the mission of the organization. That's their job. And they need to be disinterested people who are working for the mission of the organization and not for themselves. Okay. And I'm not going to rehash everything I've talked about in previous episodes about the nonprofit tax status, because that's really what it is. It's just an IRS tax status. You are allowed to have a business where you don't get taxed on the revenue minus the expenses, the profit of the business, because it's not for personal benefit. But in order to protect that tax status, certain things have to be in place. And that means a governing board who keeps an eye on everything, make sure that it's all transparent and nobody's personally benefiting, and there's sustainability and strategy happening. That's the board's job, and they're doing it without any personal interest, okay? That's how the IRS set it up, so that they can not tax. That privilege of not being taxed comes with that stipulation, okay? So for the founder, back to that, the founder is in this position where they have this mission, and maybe they don't even realize that at first when they start up the nonprofit. But how much are they passing off to this board? Okay, so that's what I want to talk about. And for the board president, which boards usually change, people on the boards change over the years, maybe every year, maybe every couple years, 2, 3, 4 years. And So you don't know if a few years down the road, the same people will be on the board that were originally part of the first mission, right? The first founding board. You want to write things into your bylaws, and I could do a whole nother episode on bylaws, but these are some things you might think about before you get to that. Just this basic understanding of the difference between the operations and the governance, okay? So governance, like I just said, it's the IRS's way of making sure that there's accountability in the financials and the legal compliance and the sustainability of the mission by having a disinterested group of people who aren't benefiting, aren't getting paid, governing the finances and the compliance and the strategy, okay? That's why you have to have a board. So, by definition, the board should be governing. And that's all they should be doing, okay? That's all they have to be doing. Now, again, it gets a little tricky because there's no police watching this besides your tax form, your IRS 990 that has to get sent in every year, all right? On that, they ask questions to make sure who's getting paid, what position do they hold, how much are they getting paid. Those are the kinds of things they're asking on that 990 because that's what they're policing. And if they start seeing conflict of interest happening, that's another thing. There has to be certain conflict of interest policies and, certain policies they want to see and language they want to see. If they start seeing suspicious things where people are making too much money or the person who's making a lot of money is also doing a lot of the governing or the president of the board and so is their sister and their, husband and whatever, that could jeopardize their tax status because the IRS doesn't want to see that, okay? So I'm reiterating this because this is the part you need to understand. This is why you have to have a governing board. Now, you can have other sorts of boards if you want to. You can, but call them something different. They can be an advisory board or something like that. But that's not what a nonprofit has to have for their tax status. Okay, a governing board is what they have to have. Now, a governing board is doing all of those things I just said. They are not operating the business. They shouldn't be operating the business. And back to that best practice thing, it's usually a pain in the neck if they try to, okay? It's frustrating for the director, who's often the founder in the beginning, or any staff that are hired, if the governing board feels like they're supposed to be managing the business. And it happens all the time, understandably, because especially in a small nonprofit that's like a startup and maybe you're just asking like friends, like I'm supposed to have a board, will you serve on my board? Oh yeah, I care about what you're doing. I want to support you. I'll be on your board. What do I have to do? And they might think, well, I'm supposed to help with this. I'm supposed to help with the business, right? And maybe they do, and maybe it's actually useful, right? And that can also be a little confusing because in the beginning, it's like, well, I don't know how, maybe you don't know how to do this before, and you're trying to make operational decisions. And the only people you have to help you, especially in the first few months, maybe before you hire staff, are these board members. So they end up maybe helping you with some things, helping you discuss things, right? But what can happen is it very quickly conflates, or there's just this overlap that sets a poor pattern for the future when you do have staff or when you get bigger, right? Or when you get new board members. And it sets this poor pattern where management operations is happening in governing board meetings, okay? And then what very often happens is a year or 2 or 3 down the road, the operational person is feeling like, really like, I don't know what I need to just be able to run this business. I need to make hiring decisions. I need to make budgetary decisions. Like I need to be able to spend money. I need to be able to do all these things. Just, this is what I do every day. I go to work and I do this stuff. I have to be able to do it. And they might have a board who is like, you're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to be helping with that. Or you have to get our approval. Or why did you make that decision without discussing it with us, right? And it's extremely frustrating. It can be very frustrating. And it happens a lot, okay? So the way to prevent that is, one, to just understand this. And then to make sure that as your board members come on, they also understand this, okay? And then you set the pattern going forward that you make a clear distinction. So even if your board members in the early days are helping you with some operational stuff, try to at least separate the meeting, right? And say like, we're going to do governing right now. You guys are my governing board. We're going to be abundantly clear on that. We're going to train you to what governance means. But since I'm just getting started, I could really use some help with operations until I'm able to hire some staff. So after we're done talking about our governing stuff, we're going to end the meeting. We're going to end the meeting minutes. And then can you guys stick around for 30 minutes so I bounce my ideas off of you? Or, can someone come to an interview with me? But it's not governing when they do that, okay? Maybe you can even call it an advisory board or something, and maybe it's the same people on it, or one or two of the same people or something, but it's like temporary, a startup advisory board or something like that, okay? So just using those labels and language from the beginning and understanding it, making sure everyone else understands it, helps you, okay? Now, a key part of this is the executive director or the head of school or the whatever you want to call the head staff position. And it could be, sometimes I've met multiple people where there was like two people who worked really closely together. So it could be two people. You just want to make sure that they either understand that they're co-directors and that they work together, or that they each have a position that they have authority in. They have like leeway and they're not just responsibility, but the authority to go do their job well without, feeling like they need to have permission or they're not supposed to do it or whatever. You have one or two people who are the executive head of school people, co-directors, whatever. And that board formally appoints this one or two positions, writes them a job description, make sure they get paid, make sure they have evaluation. And that's the bridge to operations. That's their only job, okay? And as far as operations go. And that is something the board's supposed to do. They are supposed to appoint that director position, okay? They appoint the director position. They make sure that that person is resourced as far as like they get paid, but they also have what they need. They make sure that they know they are trusted to go do the jobs. They're going to be included in all of the things that are relevant. They're not going to have a board committee meeting, go make important decisions without, budget decisions and something without talking to them. They have to be there. They have to be in the meeting because they're the one who knows what's going on the ground. But they're also able to go spend money or do whatever, within the bounds of transparency and accountability. They're able to go do those things and just be free and trusted to go do the job. Now, the board can work into the accountability structure, which, by the way, should be put in the bylaws. This stuff should be put in the bylaws in the beginning, that this director person, who is not the board president, it's the director, it's a staff director, that they might have an accountability structure such that there's some sort of, feedback or review of, in our instances with a hybrid school, maybe it's a quick curriculum review. Maybe it's staff or family survey feedback. It might be just something where you get the board, who's maybe just sitting in the boardroom with them. Maybe they're a parent who drops their kid off, but they should have a way to like assess the culture of the school to make sure the director is doing their job. Do the teachers feel supported? Do the families feel like they're having adequate delivery of the mission they signed up for? They should be doing that as far as the accountability. Because imagine, and sometimes this is hard for a founder because they're like, well, wait, I'm the one who came up with this. Who's the board to say, right? But again, the board governance, this is what you give up by being a nonprofit, by not getting taxed. What you're giving up is the ability to say, this is mine. The board has to govern and protect that mission. So you have to make sure that mission statement is written out very clearly so they know what it is they're protecting in the bylaws, okay? You can even write in the bylaws that it's hard to change it or impossible to change it. You could write all of that in there, just like our Constitution, right? It's hard to do certain things, like amend the Constitution. It's very hard to do. There's extra things that have to happen to do that, okay? You can do that with your mission statement. So you can put these protections in. But the board really is supposed to be protecting that mission, and they're supposed to be doing that by appointing that director. So imagine if for some reason you couldn't do the job anymore and you had to move away or something, and you said, oh man, what's going to happen to my business? Well, if it was an LLC, it would probably shut down. Maybe you could sell it or something. But as a nonprofit, it should be so clearly articulated in the bylaws what the mission is and what the job of that director, the job that you did, is. And it should be funded. All of that should be so clearly recorded and written down. And the evaluation process should be in place that you could, as painful as it might be, you could walk away and say whoever they hire or whoever maybe you train to take your place is going to be evaluated. They're going to be held accountable to the mission that you wrote down that you helped write, okay? And you know that your board now, whatever board comes up in the future, is going to be holding that person accountable to the mission, okay? So sometimes it helps to like remove your personal self from the position, from the mission, and just, hold it in front of you and say, I want my mission to survive. What do I have to do to make sure that that happens? Even if I am not the one who's able to go be the director for the next 50 years, 30 years, that is the life of the organization. How do I protect that mission? What do I put in place? Okay. So a lot of that is going to be a clear mission statement. It's going to be clearly articulating the authority that that director has, the staff director, okay, and how they're held accountable, how they're evaluated, making sure that their position is funded well and described well, that they have the resources that they need and the support they need. And that's the board's job for delivering on that mission through operations, okay? And then the rest of what the board is doing, the governing part, is really just what I said more than once at the beginning, of making sure that they're not just protecting that mission through the director and the accountability, but also through a strategic plan, which is going to be done very closely with the director and the staff. But it's being more formal about making sure that the program is sustainable, the budget's sound, there's money to survive. Everyone's being paid well. They're not going to have high turnover, or lose your building, or have everything sitting on one person's heart. Okay, that's their job. On top of also making sure that they're legal, right? That the paperwork gets done, the taxes get done, that there's financial transparency in place, that there's conflict of interest policies and all of it, okay? That's their job, all right? So hopefully that helps you understand. And as you go into writing bylaws, make sure that your board understands this too. So training, I can't emphasize enough how much you should have your board, your very first board member, the very first thing you should do is make sure they understand this. Make sure they understand these things. Make sure they understand the distinction. And that way you go into writing those bylaws with a very clear understanding of what they're supposed to do. They're the constitution of the government, which is the board. And they are appointing certain positions, just like the Constitution says we're going to have a president, and this is how they get elected. Okay, the bylaws will say we're going to have an executive director or head of school, whatever you want to call them, and this is how they get evaluated, and this is how, this is who does this. It might be an executive committee or something like that, okay? So you can go into those bylaws thinking long-term and with a very clear understanding of the difference between governance and operations. And then as you're moving forward, you can just make sure those systems are in place to make sure that future board members understand all of that and that you're focusing on the right things in the board meeting. And by the way, the president of the board should really be the one who facilitates like the training. But of course, in the very first year, you might, as a founder, have to learn this with the president and like train the president. And don't forget that the president it's just an officer position who conducts the meetings of the board and make sure there's order in meetings as far as facilitating and all of that. That's their job. They don't have any special powers as far as like operational or anything like that. They're just a board officer who, with the treasurer and the secretary at least, are, have more responsibility than the other voting board members, okay? But as the facilitator of the meetings, they should be able to learn this and then implement it in the meetings and make sure it happens, maybe have a special training meeting, whatever. Okay, and you should be able to pass that on to the president as quickly as possible so you can focus on operations if that's what you're doing, right, as a director. Okay, so hopefully that helps you go off in the right direction and start off with a clear distinction between those two things and avoid one of the pitfalls that often happens to brand new nonprofits. Thanks so much for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure you check out the resources I am developing at startahybridSchool.com. Send me an email anytime. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.